So I was on the phone with my son Elliot, who lives up in Brooklyn, and we were talking over some pretty serious things. And I was listening with all my might to what he had to say. And at the other in the other ear, I'm starting to hear all the news about Roe v. Wade and that the Supreme Court has just overturned Roe. So I am listening intently to my son on this side. And in this side, I'm just starting to rejoice. I'm feeling overwhelmed with joy, almost disbelieving joy, because the end of Roe has been a 50-year labor for so many people, not for me personally, but for many, many people. And it is definitely worth rejoicing and celebrating. My knees started to buckle as I started to give God thanks and glory for this momentous victory. So clearly I'm not in the camp that is advising the Christian community not to be too enthusiastic, not to rejoice too much, not to gloat over this victory. I don't think that's good advice, and I don't even believe that the people advising that believe it. Everybody who works on something like this, who enjoys a victory, wants to enjoy it and savor it. Can you imagine when slavery was ended, if people would say, well, let's not gloat over this because we've got to be concerned about the slave holders and our ongoing witness. No, you have an ongoing witness to everybody, but you still rejoice that an injustice has fallen and justice has arisen. So the end of Roe v. Wade is a victory, and it really does mean that God has given the church in America, people like you and me, an opportunity now to engage one-on-one with our friends, our family, our neighbors, and to woo them and to win them to understand that abortion is as evil as slavery. Because victory in our country means that everybody, no matter where they fall on the political spectrum, are going to want to see the end of abortion just the way we want to see the end of other forms of injustices like slavery. So my first response was just sheer joy and rejoicing and getting down on my knees and thanking God that He has honored the labor of so many people over decades. Then I began to think about those people. Some of them I know personally, and they've gone on. They've passed away in the last 5 or 6 years, especially those early pioneers. People like Dr. Mildred Jefferson. She was first African American, I believe, to graduate from Harvard Medical School, and she was a friend of mine in Boston, and we worked together on many things in the pro-life cause. But she was one of the founders of the National Right to Life movement and was an eloquent, passionate voice for the unborn for decades. And I thought of her, and I thought of another lady that I never met, but I've read about her. Her name is Laura Meyer, and she was a survivor of the Nazi regime. She grew up in a part of Germany that is now part of Poland, very, very close to Auschwitz concentration camp. She's the only survivor of 6 in her family to get through all of that and then make it to the United States. And she understood abortion in the context of what she lived out in Germany and Poland and saw the death of so many people. And she wrote the following words. I just got to share this with you. It's quite amazing. She wrote, I lived comparatively close to Auschwitz, the concentration camp most famous for the extermination of innocent prisoners. Whispers had been heard toward the end of the war, but the whole bitter truth did not come out until the prisoners were liberated and streamed in long columns through the streets of my little hometown. Even in those victims who survived, the dehumanizing spirit of destruction and cruelty was apparent. From the foregoing, it is clear that The inhuman behavior takes its toll not only on the victims, but also on the oppressors as well, and on those who stand by idly or helplessly in silent acquiescence. And she goes on and says, and it's the same with abortion. The victim loses every time. The abortionist becomes emotionally detached and insensitive to the value of human life, and the bystander, even though initially interested and concerned, may tire of the controversy and succumb to the semantic gymnastics and clever subterfuge of the proponents. So she saw the equivalence, and she spent her whole life in America, the remainder of her life, beginning to organize Christians for providing alternatives to abortion. In other words, what we call the pregnancy help movement today was started by Lori Meyer and many others that began to form little teams to say, let's provide alternatives to women who are in a pregnancy-related crisis. And she was the head then of that organization that was later called Heartbeat International. And today, when Roe was overturned, there is a network that has been built over these last 50 years of pregnancy help centers and maternity homes that are already in place now to help deal with people who are in crisis. And when abortion is being removed, the life-giving alternatives need to be in place. So you think back about these people who never lived to see this day, but they really are heroes. They're not well known. You probably never heard of Lori. Maybe you never heard of Dr. Mildred Jefferson. And all these others that helped lift this country up and build the pregnancy center movement and the right to life movement. They never lived to see this day, but I gave God glory and thanks for all these early pioneers. That was my second reaction. My third reaction was to just resolve. I mean, how can you look at people like these early pioneers who gave up everything? They gave up their reputation, they invested their time, they gave up their money to do this without wanting to follow in their footsteps, as it says in Hebrews, with this cloud of witness. Let us run the race with endurance. So the next step is, as everybody is now doing, is assessing, well, what is next? What do we need to do? And that really begins here as well as up here. What do we need to do? How can we double down? How can we make sure that every woman in America, in every town from neighborhood to neighborhood, can find the life-affirming resources that she needs? That means getting behind pregnancy centers, mothers' homes, where we live, helping at the national level, so on and so forth. But to get especially the church ready to be that pro-life community on a larger scale as the laws of Roe fall and pro-life laws are installed, we need to do our part. And I think everybody agrees with that. So I think, besides our commitment to pregnancy help centers, we have an obligation now as pastors, as leaders, especially home group leaders, elders, deacons, anybody in any level of Christian leadership. If I were you, I would immediately go out and train the people in my circle of influence how to defend the pro-life position in 5 minutes or less. What are the basic apologetics? What's the argument that you can give winsomely and you can win others over? With the end of Roe, lots of people are shaken, they're uncertain. Many Christians, I will say most Christians, cannot defend the pro-life position other than saying, well, it's in the Bible and I'm pro-life. But that's not going to cut it as we go out to our neighbors and friends who don't share our Christian worldview, but we want them to share this view of human life as it's given to us through our Constitution in a democratic republic that says that all human beings are endowed by their Creator with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We want to be able to make the case that all human beings, born and unborn, deserve equal rights and equal protection. And we need to be able to teach people, high school and college students, I would say, is number one, how to make the case for life using science as their foundation, and how to use the moral reasoning of the idea of equal rights for all people. So if you believe in equal rights, then of course you want to apply it to all people equally. And when does human life begin then becomes the ultimate question. Life begins at conception. That's when human life is. Therefore, that's when human rights should begin. And to begin to make those arguments. And if you don't know how to do that, I would say check out Scott Klusendorf's website, Pro-Life Training. We co-wrote this little book together called Stand for Life. Scott contributed a chapter here called Defending the Pro-Life Position in 5 Minutes or Less. I wrote the chapter on engaging on abortion winsomely rather than argumentatively or with anger or crassness. The medium is the message as well as the message. So learning how to speak winsomely, confidently, clearly about the life issue, I think is really critical now, because we're no longer bound by anything that the Supreme Court says. We're now at a point where we get to engage our neighbors, neighbors loving neighbors, neighbors helping neighbors, making our case and helping them recognize that this is a good thing. The protection of human life and equal rights for all human beings is a really good thing. So it also provides a great opportunity to share the gospel with people, especially those grieving past decisions. In my life, we always say it this way: there is no forgiveness for the shedding of innocent blood, except by the shedding of innocent blood. And I believe that sharing the gospel of God's grace and forgiveness as we make the case for life is why that we can rejoice in the end of Roe, and why we can be confident that standing strong for life is a good thing, because it always opens doors for us to help people recover. We're not condemning. We're not leaving anybody in the back. We're inviting them to not only join the pro-life movement, but to help lead it forward in this next generation. So I think that's really important for us to do. I had one other final thought I wanted to share here, and that is, I think that the end of Roe means that our work at Passion Life, going to Cuba, going to China, going to Vietnam, going to India, going to Colombia, Guatemala, all these places around the world where we see abortion especially concentrated, the end of Roe will make our work easier. The truth of the matter is that America, the United States, is still the leader of the free world. And whatever standing we've lost in the world, we're still the leader of the world. And what happens in America influences the rest of the world. You may not know this, but abortion is concentrated in 3 parts of the world. It's concentrated in Asia. It's concentrated in the Eastern European world. Think of the former USSR. And then it's concentrated in the Caribbean and Latin America. But in Latin America and in Africa, there are many, many existing pro-life laws and protections still in the books, and in some cases written into the Constitution. And those 2 areas, Latin America and Africa, have been under enormous pressure over the last decades to broaden and legalize abortion in their countries. But now with the end of Roe, what this means is that there's something wrong with abortion, that it can't be defended. And it will strengthen all of these countries to stand firm in their commitment that they may be poor, but they are rich when it comes to the value of human life and the value of families. And so in Guatemala, for example, the president of Guatemala has been under enormous pressure. And he came out earlier this year and said, no, we're going to make Guatemala the pro-life capital of Latin America. And he's taking a strong stand to help encourage places like Nicaragua and Costa Rica and Colombia to defend their laws. And unfortunately, in Colombia this spring, they actually declared that you can't punish abortion uh, up to 6 months. So even though it's illegal, it's not punishable. And that was sort of a backwards way of legalizing what is illegal in the country, and the protection of the unborn is written into the Constitution. I don't think that would have happened if this decision had come last year rather than right now. That alarm on my phone comes on at 3:20 every day, which is a reminder for me to pray Ephesians 3:20 that God will do more and more and pour out his power on our work. So that's what that reminder is for. Anyway, as we go to places around the world, the fact that Roe v. Wade is ended now will strengthen our ability to appeal to leaders that it is worth, the value of life is worth defending, it's worth holding on to, and there are ways that they can disciple their people and their churches and mobilize them around pregnancy crisis intervention and be a witness for this generation of the church. I think the last thing that I have a thought about is Jane Roe herself. Now, Jane Roe's name was Norma McCorvey. I met Norma McCorvey several times in the latter part of her life, and there is some controversy about what she believed toward the very, very end of her life. But I think what people write and publish in a book needs to stand as their lasting testimony. In 1995, the New York Post came out with this article announcing that Jane Roe, or Norma McCorvey, had changed her mind about abortion. This is the Jane Roe of Roe v. Wade. The backstory is that she became a believer through the work of the pro-life movement. She saw what they were doing. She opposed them bitterly. She called them names. She spit on some of the people that she talked to from time to time. But their love, their perseverance, and their steadfastness in defense of life began to bring conviction to her. And eventually she yielded her life to Jesus Christ. And this story is one of the first public announcements of Norma McCorvey changing her mind about abortion. Jane Roe flip-flops on abortion. I'm pro-life. Now, I guarantee you I don't save papers that are more than a day or two old. But in 1995, I decided I needed to save this because I thought it was a historic moment. And I wanted to believe that there would be a time when our country would also turn away from Roe. Not just Roe herself, but the country would turn away from Roe v. Wade. A couple years later, Focus on the Family did a follow-up story on Norma McCorvey. And they titled it Roe No More. And again, I took this as not just a story about how this woman was converted and brought to new life in Jesus Christ. No matter what's in her past, she like everybody else, is brought over from death to life through Jesus Christ. I thought this was a wonderful story, but I also took it as a prayer, almost as a prophecy, that one day we would see the day when Roe was no more, that Roe would be overturned, and that the people of the country in a representative republic would have a chance to stand up and to fight for what they think is right and what is wrong. And so I saved that as well. And when the decision came out, I ran down into my basement and I started to dig through my files, and I found these two articles. And it just led me again to praise God, to appreciate Norma's amazing testimony and boldness to go out as Roe v. Wade herself. And though she didn't live long enough to see this day, I praise God for her life, her conversion, her testimony. And I want to take the next years of my life, 30 so far, but we'll give the remaining years to try to put the baton into the next generation and help them bring this movement even to a conclusion where everybody sees that abortion is the intentional destruction of an innocent human being, and is beneath the dignity of a country that knows that life is a gift from God and that rights are endowed to us by our Creator. And as we continue that battle here in the United States, I think it will spread to places like China, Vietnam, India, Colombia, Cuba, and all the other places that we're working on right now. We get to see all the pioneers of these countries working with us in these places, starting to see the first pregnancy centers started in places like Bogota uh, or in Santiago, Cuba. We get to see the pioneers, the first pregnancy center, the first woman rescued through these centers, the first testimony that's being made, the first baptism that comes from this, uh, the second and the third as the testimonies go forth. We get to see and be a part of being the spark for a movement in these countries. But really, all we're really doing is bringing the righteousness and the compassion of the pro-life movement from the States into the neediest places in the world. I think it's a great movement to be a part of, and I rejoice in it, and I hope that you'll continue to find a place to get involved and give it all you've got. I'll talk to you again soon. God bless.